is not particularly unusual. And we do try to establish deconfliction channels in order to make sure that our forces are physically separated and we don't have incidents like this. But there is a pattern of behavior recently where there is a little bit more aggressive actions being conducted by the Russians. We think we haven't completed our analysis as to why that's happening.
And that is General Mark Milley detailing how Russia's aggression under Putin is at a whole new level since he ordered his troops to invade Ukraine more than a year ago. And the International Criminal Court is now coming after Putin. Joining us now is the president of Project Sentinel and a former national security advisor for President Trump in 2020, retired U.S. Army Colonel Tony Shaffer. And also with us is retired Air Force Special Operations Commander Glenn Ignazio. Tony, before we even get started, I just got to get your opinion about this big breaking news that it looks like Trump may get arrested on Tuesday. You worked with him closely before we get to the foreign policy. Your reaction, Tony?
It's totally insane and political. Look, if there was any credibility to this, you and I both know this would have been dealt with years ago. And the Democrats are opening a door that I don't think they understand the ramifications. I've said publicly that I believe Barack Obama, who did materially break the law regarding the Russian collusion narrative, could be indicted. If this happens, if they actually do this, I think that opens the door for any president to be indicted. So I just, Rita, I just don't think the Democrats understand what they're doing here. It's going to backfire greatly, and I think it'll just help elect President Trump in 2024.
Yeah, and in fact, that's even what Barney Frank was just saying in terms of at least helping him in the primary, which was an interesting point from a Democrat to hear. Let me move on to Glenn. I want to get your reaction to the other big news overseas, Glenn. The fact that the International Court has now issued an arrest warrant for President Putin, saying he's, quote, allegedly responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation of children and that of unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. And in fact, there are reports that as many as 16,000 kids have been sent from Ukraine to sort of these re-education camps, so many people think, in Russia. What are your thoughts about this, Glenn? And it's pretty amazing that that's the issue. I thought at first when they were saying that the war crimes were coming down, it might be Bucha. It might be something else. They maybe get at it, I'm sure, later. And obviously, this is very serious with the kids, too, for sure. But what are your thoughts about that big news?
Well, first of all, couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I got to tell you, is that, this issue with the kids being stolen, it's something I've actually worked very intimately with in Ukraine this whole time of trying to shut this down. And you're right, 16,000 plus, and there's supposed to be 40 camps that go from Crimea all the way through Siberia. It's a horrific situation, and it is happening. So it's crazy. The same thing about Bucha. I was there, and it's just a slaughterhouse that was up there. So I hope that those come about. But I'll tell you, it's great to finally see that some of these war crimes are actually starting to move forward and be prosecuted. And this is a solid thing that would be great to put somebody like Putin in this place.
Tony, where do you see Putin responding? He's already come out and said, well, he doesn't care what the International Court does. And I'm also wondering, Tony, I hearken back, and both of you know history so well, I hearken back to Milosevic, because Milosevic, there was also a warrant. And what happened was, as you guys know, they internally ended up arresting him and handing him over to The Hague, because what this means is that Putin basically can't travel without being arrested, technically. But they actually rose up within the country back then in the former Yugoslavia. Could that happen now with Russia? Maybe now the Russians somehow try to gather up Putin and hand him over to the high court.
I don't think so, unfortunately, because his approval numbers are high in Russia. What he's doing is actually, in the eyes of the Russians, just fine. And by the way, Rita, our own president undermined this issue. Basically, when he was asked about this yesterday, it's like, yeah, no big deal. We're not a signatory either. So we've talked about this. They've been pushing for this, Rita. The Biden administration pushed for this indictment. And then the moment it gets done, it's like they lose the leverage by Biden saying something stupid like that. because this is a leverage point. Putin doesn't like this. Will it ever be enforced? Probably not. I think Slobodan Milosevic was a different category of criminal. As you recall, Rita, we, the United States, were using our special operations forces back in the late 90s to snatch war criminals from that war. And I think there was a lot of pressure on that government to give them up. We have no such leverage now. And when Joe Biden goes around and says, yeah, no big deal, even though they're the ones pushing for it, it completely undermines the effectiveness of our foreign policy.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Glenn, that seems to almost be the case, as we have seen with Biden all week. Not just the tepid response that Tony was just repeating on the Warrant here, but remember the incident where the Russian jet hit the U.S. drone. And basically the reaction from even the Pentagon was, well, it was unprofessional. It was unsafe. I mean, what did you make of that reaction? And what message does that send to somebody like a Vladimir Putin?
Well, nothing like downtoning something as serious as having a air-to-air collision in airspace over the Black Sea during a war in Ukraine. I mean, you can't believe how powder puff this could be of saying how unprofessional. Well, it was unprofessional to actually invade Ukraine. So even the words and the choices, not even the action, are just so ridiculous and downplayed by this administration, just as we're talking about how much he's downplaying, Putin being issued an arrest warrant.
Yeah, that is really dangerous. And of course, you could go back, Tony, to the sort of minor incursion, which a lot of people believe was sort of the green light at the beginning. Is this sort of par for the course, Tony?
Yeah, look, to the point we just were talking about, the way the Russians brought that drone down was the equivalent of a dog raising its leg on a fire hydrant. They are speaking, the Russians are speaking the language of the Cold War. We're speaking some strange Dr. Strangelovian Kubrick movie dialogue that, Mark Milley, I know Mark, and I just watched the thing on the run up to our discussion here, Rita. That was insane. It's like, really? We don't know why the Russians are trying to intimidate us? Are you joking? This is beyond insane. This is now to the point of where it's a bad movie, a bad comedy, and I don't see any of the usual comedy stars involved. It's totally insane.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of people feel doesn't send a message. You think of Reagan, the sort of peace through strength, and it seems to be a very different philosophy here. Both of you guys, thank you so much. Terrific to have both of you here this morning. Thank you.
Thanks,
Nice to see you.
Thank you, guys. And coming up more